There's a lot of women out there who have been taught that if they work hard enough, if they study hard enough, if they're smart enough, okay, they build a career, they become successful, they will be equipped to navigate life. Unfortunately, that isn't true, because academic ability does not prepare you to navigate human nature, especially as a woman in the system that we are living in. You can graduate with a first-class degree. Been there, done that. You can become a lawyer, a CEO, a doctor, whatever it is you want to be, and still end up tolerating manipulation, coercion, liberty, disrespect, exploitation in your personal life, not only when it comes to friendships, but also in relationships with men, because the competencies that you need to navigate life are actually different to the skill that you needed to develop in school, in university, in college, wherever it is. And I see this quite often. There's a lot of women who are smart up here, but when you look at their decisions, when you look at their habits, especially when it comes to relationships, it doesn't align. And that is because the skills that over here are not the competencies you need over there. And, I see so many examples of women, for example, especially if they come from a religious background, naive and green. Fine. I used to be that girl when I was a girl. Naive and green, you're taught theory. Yeah, about scriptures. You're taught, if everything goes well, this is how it will be. In this video, I'm going to talk about why brilliant women get trapped at times and still end up in certain situations, even though when you look at them on paper, this is not a woman who should be in said situation. Very recently, I saw quite a few videos coming up on my TikTok feed. These are women who've got PhDs. This is why it's not about what's up here necessarily. And I've been one of those women my whole life. People said, you're so clever, etc. What people don't realize, it wasn't academic intelligence that got me to this point, to be honest with you. I had to learn, often the hard way, the difference between theory and practice, theory and reality. And we're going to talk about what these things are that women, especially women brought up in certain conservative religious environments, and also ones who rely on book smarts. Because this is one of the reasons why unsavory characters, bad faith actors can run circles around you. Okay? Now, here's the thing. If you've been taught to admire academic intelligence and actually pursue it and seek it, and this is very common in cultures all over the world, very common, okay? Your ability to memorize information, to pass exams, to write an essay, to analyze a theory, okay? And follow the rules. They're valuable skills, but that's not what's going to protect you. That is not what brings maturity and wisdom to you so that you can navigate human nature. Especially when it comes to misogynistic people, especially when it comes to narcissistic people or people with narcissistic traits. Because of course, unless you're a mental health professional, you cannot diagnose people. But my point here is we live in a world where there are lots of bad faith actors. And what is going to help you navigate that is not going to be academic intelligence at all. Because the thing that life often does, and this is something I had to learn the hard way, to a certain extent, I did learn certain parts of this the hard way, is that you have to be able to recognize manipulation. You have to be able to pattern recognize. You have to be able to identify invisible contracts, especially before the invisible contract has got you in a chokehold. You have to be able to distinguish between kindness and self-abandonment. You have to understand what ruinous empathy is. You need to be able to tolerate disappointing people. And you also have to recognize when guilt is being weaponized against you. Okay? Can you walk away when everyone is telling you to stay? Because you know in terms of your core values and integrity, you need to walk away. Now, these things are not learned at school, okay? They're not academic skills. It's quite funny, really, because a lot of the time, and I've got another video coming out on this, a lot of the time when you hear men say that they don't care about a woman's accomplishments or education, it's because they don't need you to be educated or accomplished to navigate male nature and male desire. You don't need academic ability to navigate male nature okay, and male desire in the context of heterosexual relationships. You certainly don't need it to navigate patriarchy and misogyny, which is why when I see a lot of women who are heavily, it's all well and good. You can learn all the feminist theory out there, all the womanist theory, all of it, any of it, all of it. But if you don't have certain core competencies, you will always end up trapped. You will always end up in situations you don't want to be in because it's not the same thing, right? There are women out there who can wax lyrical about certain feminist theories, but look at the decisions they make when it comes to men. Something's not lining up because wisdom and maturity does not come from that. You've got women who are deeply religious, especially when it comes to Abrahamic religions, and look at the men they choose. Now, I should not have to say this. I'm not saying that I'm not referring to abusive marriages here. I'm talking about like in the dating stages when there is choice happening. Okay? These are women who've been taught biblical theory. But sometimes that does not equip you to navigate human nature and specifically misogyny and patriarchy. In fact, what you're taught is to tolerate those things, especially if you come from a religion. And so it's very important. That pipeline, you see it all the time. You'll have a virgin Christian woman, pipeline to single motherhood or unhealthy, dysfunctional relationship, very short. And you think, how did you get there? Well, a lot of the time people are relying on theory and academics, and neither of those things are going to immunize you or insulate you from the reality of human nature, especially at its worst. And so here's the thing about religion as well. This is why you need to subscribe to this channel, by the way, because this is what I talk about. Invisible contracts. Okay. And the ability to identify an invisible contract so that you can make decisions from a place of self-authority instead of sleepwalking through life, instead of ending up in situations where you think, how did I get here? I'm feeling disappointed, let down, disillusioned because you did all the things you were told to do because you were the good girl. Well, here's the thing. And I learned this growing up in a religion. I remember one of the things that obviously in the religion I came from, of course, it's not unique to that religion. You are you are required to abstain until marriage. One of the things I always used to find interesting is that, when you're sitting around as women, especially when, you get to a certain age, and the women would talk about the fact that there may have been a sister who may have been, it's come to light that maybe she had sex before marriage, for example, or she was dating someone. They may not have had sex yet or at all, but she was dating someone who wasn't in the religion. And I'd sit and I'd listen to some of these sisters talk about all the reasons why she ended up in that situation and all the reasons why, according to scripture and what the organization says and all the things. And I used to sit there and think to myself, this is all theory. The reason why you feel so strongly about this, and this is the fact, some of them had never been in a situation where they had to say no to a date, no to being giving them. They were not in situations where they had to actually practice what we had been taught. See, it's very different. When you're out and about in life, at work, going to places, and men are approaching you, saying no and navigating those situations, the theory of what you're taught. I'll never forget, there was one talk at one of the assemblies where the brother on the platform laid out this entire scenario that apparently all women fall for, and that, we should be careful as sisters because, what if a man invites you out one day and you get there and there's one table in the restaurant and it's got candles on it and it's just got 2 seats, there's flowers, and total theory. Because how many women, in reality, that was their first date experience? Total theory. So they make up these theories, right? And people hook, line, and sinker when the test really comes in practice. And so I used to chuckle, and it's no disrespect to those sisters. I'm not saying that they weren't desirable or attractive. What I'm saying is they were not in those situations. They weren't being approached, so they never had to say no. They weren't being approached, so they never had to figure out a way not to give their number, even though the person's persisting. Do you see what theory versus practice? And the other thing often in religions is that they teach you morality, especially teach morality to girls and women, okay, if everything goes the right way. What I mean by that is if you live this way, if you marry the right person, if everyone follows that, if everyone's following the rules, everything will work out. Well, guess what doesn't happen in life? Everything working out exactly the way you planned and exactly the way the theory is taught to you, okay? Life happens in reality. Life happens in reality. I mean, when I chuckle, I look back when I was very young, obviously I had very strong thoughts about cheating. I thought, how could you ever do that to someone? I remember one of my aunts said to me, Ashanti, it's actually far more. I found that shocking. I was green and naive when I was 14, 15, right? I was green and naive. Theory. Pure and utter theory. That video that I did that went viral where I talked about what it's really like to be around a man when he is aroused, what it's like to be in his presence, the experience of penetration, consensual or non-consensual. A lot of the time as young women, you're taught theory about that. It's just theory. It's theory. I remember again when one of the sisters I knew quite well got married, and a few weeks later we were all out for dinner, and she talked about she talked about bodily fluids. She was shook even her own husband was, because both of them had abstained until marriage. Theory. People are taught complete and utter theory until you are in said situation and find yourself very unprepared. Okay? And the reality of life is people lie, people manipulate, people abuse power, people exploit kindness, people use shame. And if you haven't been taught to recognize those patterns, one, and two, be able to identify a behavior and not kid yourself, gaslight yourself into thinking it's something else, because that's the other thing. If you're unprepared for it, if you haven't been taught to pattern recognize, if you've not been taught practical application of these things, not just the moral, theoretical application of things, you don't know. Look at the number of women who say that they're feminists. And this is why the most misogynistic men and men in the middle laugh when they hear women say, I would never do this, or I never put up with this. Meanwhile, that same woman, they themselves know she has done all of those things. Now, look, you can be a human being and make different decisions and make mistakes and learn. We're not talking about that. What I'm saying is sometimes behind closed doors, people are papery thin, like tracing paper. Okay, because they simply do not have the skill, the competencies that you need to navigate human nature. And it isn't because they're necessarily stupid. Yeah, there's a lot of invisible contracts here that keep women in fairyland, up there in the clouds. And so you don't actually learn the competencies that you have to practice, by the way. Like I say, if you've never been in the situation or it lives somewhere over there, I always find it so funny when you've got lots of women, and this is where sometimes I do agree with men, you've got women who basically think they're perfect. Okay, but they've never really had relationships. So you don't really know how you show up in a relationship. Like I said, sometimes some people have never dated before. They don't know how they're going to show up in the dating scenario at all. They literally, some women think that they're perfect. Living in theory, essentially. And like I said, it's not always their fault, right? Sometimes you just haven't had certain experiences yet. So you haven't basically been road tested. You haven't road tested yourself. Okay, but this is the difference. It's the competencies that you need to build. And when I was thinking about this, there's a lesson that I learned from my childhood that I've just never forgotten. I obviously was raised in a religion whereby it's all kumbaya, keep the peace, endure, be patient, be peaceable. Where possible, let it go. Is it really an offense? If it's not really an offense, let it go. Now, there are problems with that kind of attitude, but I also come from a family that's one side of my family are incredibly kind. Okay, diplomatic and kind and long-suffering and considerate and all of the things. And so as you can probably tell, I'm not the better half of that. But I was, obviously, when I was growing up as a child, I was very, you know, obedient, compliant, all of those things as a child. And I went through a very rocky period at school where I was being bullied quite severely, and it was escalating to the point of like physical intimidation. And the truth of the matter is, inside, I was getting to a point where I was in between distressed. It was getting distressing. It was taking up too much of my thought before school, after school. I was changing the route I was walking home. I'm talking that kind of. It got to that point, being followed home, things like this. And I was getting to the point where I was in between distressed and at a point where I felt this fire within me, this rage beginning to simmer. And I have no idea, but I was sitting in the car with my dad, and I don't know whether my mum mentioned it to him or I mentioned it to him. And you know what? In many ways, sometimes I think there was a reason why that conversation happened. I didn't see him very often. It was literally a kind of bizarre meeting. And I was sitting in the front seat, he was sitting in the driver's seat. And I will never forget him saying to me, the next time one of them comes up to you, batter them. And I remember my mum saying, "You can't, no, you can't do that." Anyway, I was silent because inside I knew exactly the lesson he was teaching me. He was introducing me to boundaries. And these boundaries don't always have to be physical. And of course, I am not advocating for violence. But what he was talking about was self-defense, essentially. And I'm giving him too much credit. I would have only have used it as self-defense, okay? I would never have attacked and, initiated physical contact. My point is, he was introducing me to boundaries, okay, and energetically introducing me to standing up for myself. And that is something that the religion I was raised in did not teach. Because religions don't need women, they don't want women to stand up for themselves. They need you to be docile. They need you to be in this kind of very flat state, because then anything can go and you will absorb the teaching that is about being peaceable and kind and long suffering and the good woman. When things are done to you, is, well, you can pray about that. Have you displayed the fruitage of the Spirit enough? Okay, what areas could you improve in? Maybe that's why your husband is beating you. It's that kind of flex. Yeah, that's what you're taught in that religion, like many other religions. And so I had not been introduced to boundaries. And so when my father said that to me, I clocked it. And I've never forgotten it, because there's situations long after that in adult years where you think, yeah, I need to rise. Okay, the inner giant needs to appear now, because this person or this system needs to understand you cannot tic-tac-toe on my dignity or my peace. Okay. And it's an energy often that you have to have. Now, that wasn't taught to me in school, and it wasn't taught to me by the religion. Do you see the competency to pattern recognize, the competency to step in early before it accelerates? I've learned through observation and experience that that is what is required. And quite often that has saved me when it comes to either friendships or interacting with men. And any time I have allowed myself to philosophize, pontificate, or intellectualize somebody's treatment of me, I guarantee that it will accelerate to a liberty that goes far below the line. And this is why I hold myself accountable. But this smartness, your brain's academics, is not going to help you. That is partly why you see women make faulty, poor decision after poor decision. I had to bring myself back from that at times. You have to know when you're being stupid now. You're being stupid. Okay? And this is why it's so important to have self-respect. Okay? People will tell you that you're clever all the time. You might have a PhD. As I say, you can wax lyrical about feminist theory and all sorts of things. But guess what? Bad faith actors, poor character people, misogynistic men, you're not playing the same game. They're not even in the same field as you. They look on those things and they laugh because they know that that's not those aren't the levers that they're going to pull on. And they also know which women can't pull on the competencies of life navigation. So they're going to run circles around you. Absolute circles. I'm saying this from experience. I had one particular experience. I said, yeah, I went in there like the good Christian woman, honesty and all that jazz. And let me tell you, this person ran circles around me. Okay. And so it's really important to make decisions from a place of self-respect. When you have a difficult decision or you are witnessing behavior in front of you, it's not about what keeps everyone happy. It's not about, no. What protects my dignity? What honors my dignity? Make the decision from that place. Use your common sense. Trust your body and the information that it is surfacing when you feel uncomfortable. This is all information that you cannot override with academic intelligence at all. It's very important. And so this is why invisible contracts matter so much. This is why the invisible contract framework booklet, which is free, is in the description somewhere. Download it. Because nobody is teaching women how to identify these invisible contracts, yeah? How to recognize certain things. Why being the good girl is not helpful in reality. Over-explaining yourself. Endless tolerance of foolishness. Keeping the peace instead of sometimes having to address people. Sometimes some confrontation is necessary. Okay? Valuing being chosen over being respected. You can't outsmart your way a lot of the time around bad faith actors, poor character people, misogynistic men. You can't outsmart your way out of those situations, yeah? You've got to develop some of these core competencies, and it starts by being able to identify invisible contracts, being able to critically think for yourself. Do not outsource the authority that you have as an adult woman to think. Discernment, boundaries. And look, I see there's lots of kind of these dating and femininity coaches out there, right? You think that you're learning the war of dating. A lot of women just take to that stuff the same way they take to a test because they're still missing self-respect. They're still missing self-esteem. So it doesn't matter what the dating coach teaches you. It doesn't matter what the femininity coach teaches you, because you may still not be equipped to navigate human nature, especially the worst of it. Especially the worst of it. And so your ability to disappoint people, your ability to walk away, your ability to recognize manipulation before it becomes abuse. These are core life skills that we need to have as women. So don't fall into the trap of believing that your academic ability in any way will immunize you, that the biblical theory, whatever holy text it is, that if everything goes right, that you can pray to God and it will get it. No. So download the framework. It's completely free. And it takes you through what these invisible contracts can look like and how you identify them.